Now we are going to begin the first session, Cybersecurity for Consumer IoT. And I would like to hand it over to moderator, Xavier Braidno, the head of external relations from ETSI. Mr. Xavier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you, Casey and Adrian, for the introduction. I won't say much because I mean we have obvious reasons today to meet and exchange on the topic of cybersecurity. But I'd like to stress that I mean obviously we live in an increasingly connected world, which offers an ever augmenting attack surface for various players in the world, and we need to make sure that security of our connected devices, whether they are in the consumer space or the industrial space, are that the security is at the right level. And we need also to understand that this whole set of device forms one big system for which the security level is that of its weakest part. So today we are having a session that focuses on cybersecurity for consumer IoT, where it is important to raise the bar and increase awareness and good practices. And for that, today we have a panel of players who will give us updates on how this is approached from the European side and from the Korean side. This session will be, I mean, the landscape will be set by Alex Ledbeater, who is the chairman of our ETSI TC Cyber Committee, and then Dr. Gisela Meister from Eurosmart will provide an update from the European approach, and then Professor Yum from the Soonchunhyang University will give the update from the Korean side. And then we will be joined by Jong-Yoon Baek from the Korean Internet and Security Agency for the panel discussion. That's all on my side, and I'll come back to you in the panel discussion. Alex, the floor is yours. Alex, make sure you are unmuted, please.
There we go. That's better. Fallen for the unmute trick. I've multi-screened myself. So yes, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever time you're watching this on replay. Hello and welcome. I'm Alex Ledbeater, as Adrian said, the chair of ETSI's cybersecurity group, TC Cyber. Work for British Telecom, BT Security in the UK. So what I'm going to spend the next few 10 minutes or so doing is going through the landscape from an ETSI perspective, but also positioning this in terms of what cybersecurity standards need to achieve as a building block. And as Adrian said, it's very much cybersecurity standards are a tool and an enabler in a process, but they are not the absolute end game and only thing we need in the toolbox. So to set a little bit of context, being British, I always like to start with the weather forecast. From the perspective of Europe, we've seen an awful lot of stories of cybersecurity devices that have definitely not hit the mark, be that Kayla dolls or other items that have ended up on the front of major newspapers. Clearly, there are elements where cybersecurity is not good enough, both in general IoT and in wider radio systems. But I think we also have to set this against a backdrop of there is some really, really good security. So when people talk about the need to improve cybersecurity and the need to raise the bar, we have to accept that there are areas where cybersecurity is pretty good. Sectors like 3GPP, the radio access security, is fundamentally strong. as Adrian commented again, TTA and ETSI and the other partners in 3GPP have put a lot of effort into that, and 5G again moves that story and that general security outcome onward. But other sectors like medical devices, banking, again, they're already in a pretty good place. We also have to understand that one size does not fit all in the IoT space. Security principles and security requirements and security mitigations for example, critical national infrastructure will radically differ from perhaps those that are proportionate and affordable for devices that are buried in a road or cheap in somebody's house. So it's all about raising the bar, proportionality, but we also have to consider the balance between raising the bar as an absolute goal and the industry ability to implement that. So as I've said, IoT security is both for consumer and the sort of critical national infrastructure sectors becoming increasingly important. In ETSI, we have put quite a lot of effort into this already in something called EN 303645, and Gisela will be explaining an awful lot more about that in detail than I'm going to here. But so we already have a baseline in Europe, and that is being adopted in a number of other countries well outside the European continent. But I think, as noted on the bottom of the slide, as it says, no product is ever 100% secure. So we have to consider in how we test, how we certify, how we deal with the fact that testing and certification on its own is not going to solve the absolute problem. Testing a product once, putting it on the bench and saying that's wonderful, it's secure, that's great, but it's only as good as the day it was tested. We also have to consider what the purpose of standards is. And I think people sometimes forget this. Ultimately, if the end service and product does not give the end user the intended security or privacy benefit, then we have failed. So that for me is always the start point. And it'd be great to explore this in the workshop. That is the measurable benefit that makes the purpose of the standards worthwhile. If we achieve that, we've got the right balance. If we don't achieve that, we haven't. And remembering that security is always a cost. So adding security purely for the sake of security is never good, but adding security to bring security benefit and privacy benefit to the end user and the European citizen, yes, absolutely. Role of standards, Adrian again hinted around this, but I think it's worth dwelling that there are different types of standards. There are vertical standards, for example, for a specific widget, or let's say marine or automotive or aviation sectors, and there are horizontal standards that cover all devices more generically. EN 303645 is very much a horizontal standard, and the regulations do both. So what I also wanted to put into context is the regulation framework in Europe. Now, everybody listening will be pleased to know that I'm not going to go through any of these in detail. We'd need several months to do that. But it's worth noting that there are a number of pieces of cybersecurity regulation, both future and current. It's not just one piece that drives us. I suspect Korea will be in a similar position. And we have to make sure that what we do for each piece of regulation, each security benefit, each security outcome for the consumer is set against the need to not do things multiple times. So if we can, as manufacturers and operators, if we can certify things once in the world, and that is good for all global markets, that is excellent. It minimizes waste, it optimizes the use of the security professionals and the frankly very scarce resources. The other thing we have to consider in terms of how we write our standards and how the certification regimes are going to work is what they attempt to achieve. Traditionally in Europe, most certification regimes were based around essentially the concept of legal certainty. So the idea was to test something that was functional and objective and achieve a fixed, repeatable outcome. The challenge with cybersecurity is it really doesn't lend itself to this. It's very much risk-based. A particular way of mitigating a security problem is going to be appropriate in a given circumstance. It's not necessarily going to be proportionate or practical in a different one. So to give an example, in Europe, we've been talking quite a lot around the Radio Equipment Directive and what to do with assistance devices. So whereas, for example, a smartphone, we can put high grade or quality sort of long security key length algorithms into smartphones, 3GPP handsets. If we wanted to do that, for example, with an assistance device, a hearing aid or something like that, that is eminently impractical due to the battery power consumption that security mechanism will cause to the device. So you alter the balance between security benefit and usability. And that is all part of the subjective risk trade-off. And Gisela will talk about that a little bit more in detail in the next presentation. I also wanted to highlight how ETSI's ecosystem goes together in terms of what standards we've worked on and the individual elements that put it together. At the top, we have EN 303645, very much the benchmark that everything is based from for us. We then have harmonized standards. So those that everybody will have to do under the RED. We have CSA, the Cybersecurity Act. We'll also have the horizontal legislation as well coming shortly. But underpinning that are things like the UICC certification schemes and things like NESAS, potentially GSMA, TTA will have had some involvement in that. So the final slide I really want us to focus on before I move on is just to give us a little warm up on the approach that Europe's taken to raising the bar. On the screen or on the slides for you are the key provisions from EN 303645. And before Gisela takes over, I just want people to think about how simple all of those mitigations are. And yet in 2021, a good 50% plus of products on the market don't necessarily meet even the key 1 to 3, so 5.1 to 5.3 provisions, let alone all 13 of them. All 13 are really, really basic, and that is the challenge in terms of raising the bar we have. So if people want to read more about any of that, the ETSI website has got some useful links there. Similarly, the slides, I've skipped over a couple for you, will be available afterwards. So thank you. I wish all the rest of the participants an excellent and fruitful workshop. And I'd now like to hand over to Gisela to carry on the story of EN 303645 and the certification family that goes with it.
Actually, I would like to, but I have to give my screen free, and I have a problem with this, but I have a try. Here's Gisela Meister speaking. I have a look if it's possible now. Yes, now I can manage. Thank you very much for waiting and for your patience. So I would like to start now. And I imagine I have not so much time I would like to have, but nevertheless, we have a try. And just first to introduce me, my name is Gisela Meister, and I'm coming from Eurosmart. I'm their senior consultant, and I'm very much involved in standardization activities for ETSI, main thing, of course, and as well for CEN and for the German DIN. There I'm a convener of the respective mirror group of CEN ETSI TC Cyber and CEN JTC 13. But let us start with the following slide, as well as Alex already said, to warm you up. Yes, you see the EN consists of, you heard already, so I can just focus on the EN 3.3 645 series. And this EN consists of provisions which are very much outcome focused and nevertheless have the challenge actually that there are a lot of different device types, you know, flood sensors, fitness trackers, IP sound systems, and the respective interfaces. So the provisions have to be generic to envelope all what is on the IoT consumer device market. And I think it's very much industry focused. And so we would like to embrace all development what were already on the market, and we did so. So the ETSI, just to give you a small hint, I would like to show you the development of the EN. Nothing new, of course, but just to give you a hint. So it worked together with the just already mentioned 10 JTC 13 members, which all as well are cyber experts. So and as well, this EN was consisting included core contents of the German national standardization body DIN and the UK technical study. So as I said already, a lot of industry was involved. And what Alex already told you, this is the EN would like to establish a common baseline about across the European and wider market. So rising the security bar, that means not to a very high level, but to a suitable level, which can be done actually. And the important thing is that the already known attacks are covered. That means these requirements are fit against these recent attacks and for instance, the already known Mirai attack. So as I said already, contains outcome-focused provision, and it creates a necessary flexibility, and it covers all consumer IoT. I think that is very important. This you have seen already, this slide with Alex. I think I just indicated these are the main, these three are the main important requirements. And I think it would be really helpful if not only 50% of the devices could cover them, but we could reach the bar that nearly all devices could have covered this requirements. So I hope this is possible, and therefore we established as well test specification. So this which could be used for the assessment in-house or external, and this is done by the TS, the technical standard 1.3701, which is ready. So just which is finished already. And I don't want to go too much on the review concept, implement provisions and conformance statements, because I think you can read it all. You get the slides, and I would like to go because I would like to bring you an update of that what I had presented before to the next slide, which shows actually the update. The ETSI EN, you know already, so there's a reference if you click on it, and there's the ETSI TS I mentioned just before. That was finished in August, was planned in the first quarter of 2021, but we did not manage quite to reach this goal, but August was well enough, I think. And as we have planned to get an TR, which is an implementation guidance to meet the EN provisions and present examples. I think that is very important, I think, for the implementers at the end of this year, but I doubt that this would be possible because we have a lot of other things to do, which Alex mentioned already. regarding, for instance, the Radio Equipment Directive and the new delegated acts. And I think what is very important here as well, to provide vertical standards, domain-specific extensions. And there we have some in work already as a smart locks, as a home gateway draft technical standard, which is non-IoT, but nevertheless relates on these provisions, which is very good and which shows that ETSI has a strategy which really embraces not only the IoT, or covers not only the IoT, but as well the related non-IoT devices like the home gateway. Then we intend to produce a vertical standard in relating to smart toys. I think that was a really important issue, which was as well a point where the EU was very much keen on. And I think that is just as well not only a skeleton, but it's the intention to enhance privacy related topics which are already in the EN, but related to smart toys, it's essential to do some enhancement. This vertical standards has the advantage to be more perspective, testable, and stringent specification using the EN as a baseline and providing, as I said, the guidance. And they would provide a so-called template, so that you just, as a user, have the experience to know the structure. And we have already produced a skeleton regarding these vertical requirements, which will be part of these vertical standards. So let me come to the next slide. Regarding the EN in support of the Cybersecurity Act, which was as well already mentioned last time, that the EN is very suitable and brings an important step in direction to developing standards to support the Cybersecurity Act and certification, and it forms the basic level for consumer IoT assurance. To go a bit deeper on this cyber assessment for consumer IoT, where I have the honor to be the editor, the rapporteur of. So as I said already, it was published in August. The objectives are a transparent generic specification for the conformance assessment against the EN, and it contains something a bit more explicit than it was already in the EN. The implementation conformance statement, how to do this as well, like a template, the implementation extra information for testing, more detailed, and a catalog of generic test cases which are mapped from all provision of the EN. And the target group are the manufacturers, in-house testing departments, and independent assessment lab, as already told you. So just to give you a hint how this can work, you see you have the EN, the TS, and as I said, you have this template to fill in, this ICS, implementation conformance statement, which are already included in the EN, and a bit more detailed, suitable for testing, this implementation extra information for testing. And then you can do a self-assessment, or you can use, of course, a certification scheme, for instance, IoT certificate, which is planned in Europe by the EU, for instance, or private certification schemes, which are already on the market. And the advantage, of course, is that you can put in their additional requirements just to make this more comparable, like the tester expertise and cryptographic requirements to represent the state of the technique there. important is here, you can use, as I said already, for the certification scheme, an IoT certificate, or for the self-assessment, there's suitable as well an IoT label. For instance, in Germany is something in work, and you know this from other countries like Singapore, for instance, or Finland as well. To give you a hint where already the EN and the TS is used, excuse me. So you see a lot of companies and which offers testing against EN or laboratories, and so this is, I think, here very important that we have here a lot of companies which could fill in and could help the developer to go against the EN and the TS. I don't want to go too much in the details, but I think this overview shows you that this is not only European-wide used, the EN and the TS, but as well already international, well-known, and started to be used as well. So Alex mentioned already the radio equipment directives, the so-called RED. And there is a new delegated act on security requirements now published already. However, one has to say that the EN is not suitable as such to become a harmonized standard under the RED. There are a lot of not only mandatory requirements, but as well recommendations which are not fit for a harmonized standard, but it can inform, and that are the good news, the development of such harmonized standards. And ETSI is in the meantime already working on a RED security requirements study. So if you would like to join, that would be very good to make this happen, this harmonized standard. And I think this is the main thing I wanted to say as well, that of course UK legislation already dealt heavily on the first three requirements for the UK legislation. Last not least, I would like to give you some information, which is more my personal information, of course, for a comparison of the content of the ISO standard in work, which is not only on consumer, but as well on consumer and industrial IoT in comparison to ETSI. You see, you could say somehow that the EN, even if it's as well, I think horizontal would be as a consumer IoT standard to be seen, could be seen as sector specific to the general ISO standard. And you see that the requirements are very much for the EN consumer oriented, and a lot of mandatory requirements which can be mapped very well to certification and labeling schemes, which would be the advantage of the EN because it's more stringent than the ISO ETSI generic standard as well. Of course, for instance, such a standard like door lock would be more specific as EN and even more suitable to be mapped to a respective certification scheme. Or for instance, let us think about the e-toys, electronic toys specification. I think that would be a really good example to include more privacy. But this is, of course, something to be worked out for the future. Yeah, and now I'm at the end of my presentation and I'm happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Gisela. I think we will take questions maybe in the chat.
Okay.
and I will bring them in the panel discussion. I would like now to hand over to Professor Yum for the update on the Korean approach. So Professor Yum, the floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Hung-Yeol Yum, working for Suncheon University as professor. Currently, I am chairman of IoT Study Group 17 on security. I would like to provide an update on Korean approach to cybersecurity for consumer IoT. Let me just introduce the definition of IoT devices in Korean regulations. Actually, there are so many IoT devices, but devices for smart factory, smart registrator, smart key, so-called door lock, and also smart car could be considered as a IoT devices. According to our Act on Promotion of Information and Communications Network Utilization and Protection, IoT devices are considered as ICT things connecting to network, which can exchange data between people and things or among things, which is based on ICT. I think you can imagine the definition of IoT device is very similar to the definition of network connected device, which is defined in our regulation in Korea. Actually, let me just introduce briefly IoT Security Certification scheme in Korea. Actually, as I said, IoT Security Certification scheme is based on regulation, on Act on Promotion of Information and Communication, Network Utilization and Protection, etc. Actually, recently, this Act has been revised in May 2022 to incorporate the update of the IoT Security Certification scheme in Korea. Actually, 3 levels of assurance level has been defined: light, basic, and standard. And then if some devices meet the criteria specified by Korean Information Security Agency and our administrations, that devices will be given to the certificate. So actually, there are many concerns expressed by a public regarding the vulnerabilities of the IoT devices. So currently, we consider a third-party certification scheme, but currently self-enhancement of the security of IoT by industry itself was considered. And so objective is to enhance of the security capability of domestic IoT companies and promotions. Actually, there are several actors for these IoT certification schemes. Actually, our Ministry of Science and ICT plays a active roles. For example, a designated certification testing and give some authority to KISA regarding the certification work. And then KISA, Korea Internet and Security Agencies, currently plays a very active role in these IoT certifications. So GISA plays act as a certification test agencies, and then on right side there is a industry. So industry apply for a certification for target devices, and then GISA and there are other third-party testing delegation organization conduct a testing, and then as a result will be submit to the GISA, and the GISA is give a certificate to the industry. That is a main flow of the IoT certification scheme in Korea. Actually, very similarly, industry submit a application, and certification testing organization conducts a test mainly by a GISA, and then GISA conduct a executive decision of the testing result, and then testing report will be drafted, and then there is a certification commission consisting of experts from industry and academia and public institutions to review the testing result, and then once certification committee complete a testing report, review of the testing result, industry is given a certificate. That is a procedure. And actually, we currently have a 41 certification criteria for 5 main areas, such as authentication, cryptography, data security, and platform security, and physical security. So there are sub-area. For example, authentication area consists of 3 sub-area: user authentication, secure use of the authentication credential, and product services. For example, for the user authentication sub-area, there are 8 detailed criteria. So I do not want to go into the details about the criteria, but our certification criteria is based on the ITOT IoT Sector 4, which is now being developed by ITOT Study Group 17, Q6. Actually, as I said before, we have a 3 assurance level: light level, and badging level, and standard level. So light level based on the firmware such as sensor, and the minimum measure is provided, and the badging level for a medium weight devices deploying low spec operation system, general measures can be divided to prevent exploitations of non-security weakness through hacking. And then standard level for the heavyweight smart consumer devices. Actually, currently for this level is for mutual recognition with foreign IoT certifications. As I said before, our certification scheme is based on the as a legal ground, that is a act on promotion of ICT network utilization and promotion, etc. Actually, there is a Article 49-5 mentioned that our ministry may support expenses necessary for carrying out the following projects. And then also there is a other Article 49.6, certification of network connected devices, mentioned that our ministry may grant certificate if the network connected devices meet certification testing criteria as the result of test by a certification testing delegates organizations. And also our ministry may establish and publicly announce certification criteria for stability of securing the reliability of information for certification. Let me briefly introduce current status statistics for the IoT security certification. Actually, this slide shows a assurance of IoT security certificate by years as of today. So actually, we have no certification for the standard, but in 2021, we have a 38 basic level assurance certificate. And then in 2021, we have, as of today, 91 certification was given to the industry. Total 129. So we see an increasing number of certification every year. And then this slide shows the assurance of security certificates for each IoT product services. So according to the our numbers, it was provided by GISC. Home assurance is the main part for our certifications. And so 64% accounts for the assurance of security certificate. And then next, environment area, and also medical area and energy area and other areas. That is the next. So we see a home appliance is dominant for our security certificate. And this slide shows a number of the application of IoT security certificate by month in 2021 as of today. So according to, so currently in May, there are a, for example, a badging level. There are a actually one certificates, and then so for right level, I believe the 16. So total 17. So I think that since this today, November 10th, so we have this number for number of the application of IoT security certification by month. And then there is a special need for assurance of the medical IoT devices. So in 2021, so for example, on August, we received 4 applications, and then we issued 3 certificates in the area of medical IoT devices. So as of today, 14 applications, and then we have 3 assurance. And I think that this is a IoT security activity in IoT study of 17. Study of 17 has 1 questions, and then we have 8 recommendations, extra 3061 to extra 3068, and then we currently question 6 has 4 text. For example, extra IoT sector 4 security requirement for IoT device and gateways. And then I would like to, this one is, as I mentioned, the IoT, IoT sector 4, actually established on September 2018. This is under development. Intention is to adopt IoT security assessment client criteria put in place in Korea now into these recommendations. And this is a same slide. So there are several areas and then sub areas. And then, as you may know, there are other network elements, for example, secure gateway and then home application server. So I would like to introduce X.1111, which was approved February 2007. The scope is to identify security threat and requirements. And then currently our ministry is considering to use this X.1111 to identify a minimum set of security requirements for IoT devices and also IoT also servers in home networks. So that is a ongoing activities. And then there is so many other SDOs working on IoT areas. As I said, actually, ISO working group 4 also has a work items. And then future. Currently, we are considering improvement of the certification by KISA and our ministry. So roles of the currently KISA has two roles, certification agency and then testing agencies, and then the two roles will be separated later. And then currently our certification is to focusing on only one areas, that is a ICT areas, but expansion, the plan is to expand to include 8 other areas: home appliance, transportation, financials, and smart cities. And the mandatory IoT security certification is now considered by the third party under considerations for the very important IoT devices which are used for critical areas. And then we will promote a self-assessment also by industry itself. I think the security by design and the privacy by design should be applied, and then controls and criteria should be defined and updated according to the risk-based approaches, and the mandatory certification should be considered for IoT devices that are applicable to critical information infrastructure. And then also we have Korean schemes, and also EU has a schemes. So I believe that mutual recognition may be needed. So that is my presentation. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Yum, for this presentation. Now we are going to have a short exchange between the experts. We are joined also by Mr. Jong-Young Baek from the Korean Internet and Security Agency. A first question which I would like to ask to you all is whether, I mean, we saw in the conclusion of Professor Yum a very concrete suggestion, but what do you see as steps to take that would pave the way for potential mutual recognition of IoT security certification between Korea and the European Union? Can I give the floor to, and maybe Professor Yum, I will have you first answer that question, since you had a proposal in the conclusion of your slides.
Thank you. So I think Dr. Baek is more appropriate expert to answer this question, but I think that we need to do first. We need to start first. So maybe, I'm not sure, but we need to consult with our ministry and KISA. KISA plays as I mentioned, active roles So I think that we could have some ad hocs to start a consideration of the mutual recognition between Korea and EU. That is my first statement on your questions. I would like to invite Dr. Beck to give a more specific proposal and suggestions, since
Yes,
you are
please.
working for KISA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Chung Hyun Baek from the KISA, Korean Internet and Security Agency, and also I'm the rapporteur of the TTA-17 Q6. It is related on the IoT security. But anyway, just the mutual recognition, the problem is not easy and not very fast. So anyway, just Korea have some IoT certification schemes already, and just we have some published certification for the IoT industry and many of the products and their manufacturers product is there. So some of the company and some of the manufacturer, if they want to export their devices and solutions to the Europe or other place, then they need another certification. Even they have a certification from the Korean government. So hopefully we can have a good approach to making a mutual recognition about these issues. And if the Korean company have that kind of the benefit after the mutual recognition, then it's very helpful to them. So, but it's not only for the technical problem, but I believe it's some kind of the governance issues. So now on, I'm not sure how can we handle directly, but maybe I think Professor Young mentioned before that we have some ad hoc meeting on these issues, and we just find a way to how can we handle these issues on the mutual recognition from EU and Korea. Okay, that's
Yes, thank you very much. I think indeed, I mean, this question is very, I mean, it has technical aspects and political aspects, and I think here we are discussing the steps that we can take at our level as actors of the technical world to make sure that if the political decision is there, then it can be implemented. So maybe Gisela and then Alex, can I have your views on this topic?
Thank you very much. Yes, as I mentioned in my presentation, you see that the EN leans very much heavily on the Cybersecurity Act as well on then on the respective certification scheme. That means there will be an IoT certification scheme in work as well as IoT labels. And ETSI standards are worldwide spread and therefore could really be a base actually for such certification schemes, which then would be, I think, based on this, on comparable standards. And I think that would be just from the technical point of view, very helpful to perform as such.
Okay, thank you, Gisela. Alex, any comment on the topic?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting for me listening to the discussion is I think there's a slight differing of focus between the approach that's been taken by Korea and the approach that's been taken by Europe in terms of which end of the problem do you start from. And what I can see is they're both sort of converging towards the middle. So Europe has gone down the route of saying, well, what we want to do is raise the bar for all devices and get everything up to a minimum, while also looking, for example, with CSA at critical national infrastructure. So the KISA style heavyweight testing model, which is relatively slow, is very similar to the EU CC, so the common criteria scheme used outside of IoT. So I think the alignment challenge comes in terms of what we're trying to achieve through certification and what products you're applying it to. So we've gone for a mixture. got a bit of feedback, I think. So we've gone for a mixture of sort of raising the bar type approach. So I think that's the first thing, is how do we align the initial aims? Each has its goals, and I can sort of see. I noted on the summary slide, the aim for self-certification for the manufacturers was on the list. So I think at the point that Korea gets that far, the ability to sort of align the European approach and the Korean approach will get much stronger. Because one of the things we found, for example, is while you can take great value in focusing on the sort of some of the higher risk devices, which is the route Korea's gone down. One of the things we found in Europe, for example, with things like the Mirai botnet, is that it's very often the light devices that in themselves are low risk, but there are lots of, then go on to cause an awful lot of problems, because while the attacker doesn't have an impact on those individual devices, they gang up on other devices in botnet form to cause havoc. So it's very much, for me, as I say, I think Korea and Europe have just started from different points on the problem curve, but are sort of converging in the middle. You can see that in the roadmaps. We're all trying to get to the same point. And as I say, I think as we get a little bit further, and perhaps, you know, there's a little bit more discussion, a few more workshops to try and figure out, well, how do we get to that common position? It will get easier. And also, as Gisela said, as CSA comes to the front in Europe, I think we'll also see a little bit more alignment of the sort of objectives and the certification schemes.
Thank you very much, Alex. And indeed, there is probably a meeting point where we can really engage concrete actions in the future. Another question I'd like to ask is, I mean, we are all talking about devices. I mean, and whether they're in the consumer space or the industry space, do you think there needs to be attention given to the networks on which these devices operate? We have seen that, I mean, especially in the consumer space, many devices end up on the home network and things like this. Are there steps to take to secure the networks themselves? Is it part of maybe simply addressing the home gateway as a device that, when well configured, will ultimately allow for a more secure network? Basically, yeah, this is my question. Should we care also about the networks? Maybe can I invite Professor Yom again to start?
Thank you. So I think, as I mentioned, I think that if you look at the current home networks, incorporating many IoT devices, for example, smart doors, and then smart refrigerators, and also smart control systems. So according to the X.1111, there are three devices has been defined. One is a type A, is a control device. And then the other one is a type B, legacy device without communication capability. And then type C, new device with a communication capabilities. I think we need to consider other threats happened in network levels, not a IoT levels. Because as you mentioned, there is a home gateway, and then home gateway incorporating a many IoT devices. If we provide some assurance to the IoT devices, that is not enough, because home networks, home gateway needs to be protected and then meet a minimum set of the security requirements. So I think that we need to consider the other devices put in place in home network. That is my idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any comments on this, Professor Beck?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm not an expert on the network, but anyway, just I take charge of the IoT security issue, but also I take charge of the convergence. We call the convergence network, convergence industry, but it's kind of vertical services such as smart home and smart city, smart factory, and many of the areas. So in the case, network is one of the very important parts of that. So, and each of the industry using some little bit different network systems. So currently we just consider to each of the network, then just how they can supporting the security issues, and then can they make ensure the secure communications for using their network. So anyway, just we just using some security in enterprise systems for using the further network security. So, but currently, it's just I would have the interest about how can we handle and how can we control the network, but in detailing how can make ensure the networks such as 5G or Wi-Fi or Wi-Fi 6 and other many of the networks for in particular services. So anyway, just we needed more learn about that kind of issues for networks. But currently, that's all my information and my knowledge is like that. So for the network issues.
Thank you very much. Gisela, may I invite you?
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to say that home gateways play, of course, a central role to provide some protection for the home network, and there as well we have to see from the technical point of view what I only can mention, of course, that the standards are needed, that ETSI does already, has a standard in work, what I mentioned already, which is very much in line with the EN. That means that, as already Alex said, that are only baseline requirements, but nevertheless, I think that would help a lot already if you fulfill them. And we have just to try, of course, to align standardization activities. I'd say that is plays an essential role. And then I think such certification schemes can build on this. So I think the base are the standards, and I think there we could play a really important role as experts to support these standardization activities.
Thank you, Gisela. Alex?
Yeah, so I actually have a more nuanced answer. So I think it's a common weakness in IoT security that there is an assumption that the underlying network is secure. So people assume that the underlying infrastructure is the golden or the silver bullet to security. And as we talk about in 3GPP and TC Cyber regularly, that's always a recipe for failure. You should always assume that the underlying network is insecure and untrusted. That said, the home gateways themselves are a key focus point in things like the fixed network convergence, the 5G home gateways. Clearly, there's some security thought being given to those. But for a lot of low capability or low security capability end devices, and I talked about this earlier, we can't secure all IoT devices. Some of them are not hardware or other placement constraint environmental capable. If they're small, low power battery devices, high grade mains power sort of requirement crypto is not going to work very well. So the home gateway is a key element that we do need to put more focus on. Also, we need to be looking, as Gisela hinted at perhaps more standardization of those items. So we've got commonality, peer-to-peer, equivalence, plug and play between different types. But ultimately, I think I see network security of the underlying network as separate. We need to focus on that and get it right. But IoT and the gateways then need to assume that what they're running over the top of is not terribly secure. And then if it turns out it is, you've got security benefit, but you don't rely on an assumption that there is magic security underneath, and therefore you don't care about, for example, where your endpoints are or how an attacker might get in downstream. So a nuanced answer. It's all about raising the bar across the ecosystem at all points in it. Security will only ever be as strong as the weakest point in the link. Therefore, we have to think about all of them, not just some of them.
Thank you, Alex. A very valid point indeed. We'll stay there for the panel discussion because we are running slightly late, and I will hand over to back to Joseph for the second session, and I'll come back to takeaways in the conclusion of the workshop. Thank you very much to you all.
Thank you very much, all the participants of the first session.